Hello everyone. Today we are connecting to TamSanat Online Art Talks from Liverpool again, and our guest Jai Chuhan is going to connect from Manchester. And today we are going to talk with her about isolation, isolated figures of her, and also her art career and her story and art style. Also, I would like to share an information related with her that maybe some of you, especially from our audiences from Turkey, knows her works from exhibition that is occurred in Art Ankara in Living in Contrast project. It was a John Moores University project that I have organized, and she was one of the artists that you have seen her works, and maybe you are familiar with them. Also, you know her works from our online exhibition in 1st of April, Make Art No Joke, and the other one is World Art Day exhibition that's taken place in online TamSanat gallery. Now I'm connecting with her. Yes, she's in there. Hello, Jenny. You're welcome.
Hello, Oscar. It's so lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you again. Yes, I remember our talks in John Moores University, and now it's wonderful to meet with you in these art talks, online art talks, and talking about deeply on your art. And I want to share a small information. I've talked about your exhibition in Turkey and our online website, but also some more maybe. She's an art professor in John Moores University, and Isolated Figures is one of the last works of her, and she generally focuses on human. I know that she has started with the profiles of human, and then go deeply in that side, and home and unhome is another issue that takes place on her works, and we will hear more about the details, I think, in that talk. I would like to ask how you have started with art. What would you like to say about the starting point of your art career, maybe the earlier stage?
Well, the earliest stage would be when I was first came to the UK. I came to the UK when I was 9 years old from India, from the Punjab. And as a child growing up, I didn't know really about the fine art world at all, although I remember I used to really enjoy making things with clay and so on. But then when I first came to the UK, we were on a sightseeing visit in Trafalgar Square in London, where the National Gallery is. So with my family and some family friends, we went inside, and I was just absolutely amazed at the things I saw. I didn't know who the artists were or anything, and I remember seeing these amazing paintings, which I now know were by artists such as Titian, and it was just so beautiful. And there was one painting I particularly still remember seeing vividly, was a large painting of water lilies by Claude Monet. And I had never seen anything like it, before. So I think that resonated with me. And then during school, art was one of my favorite subjects. And then I ended up being an art student at the Slade School of Fine Art at University College London. And that was an absolutely thrilling, amazing period of time. Looking at exhibitions, talking, having a dialogue with other students, with tutors. So, I fell in love with the idea of trying to make work even more. And then after leaving college, it's quite difficult for a lot of people when they first leave college. And in those days, this was in the late 1970s, there wasn't the same kind of information that there is these days about artists in different parts of the world. The world didn't seem so kind of huge,
Yeah.
in the sense of being able to communicate with people all over, and there wasn't the same amount of information about what was happening in the art world in different countries as there is now with the click of a button. So I didn't really think I would be an artist. I thought you had to be something really amazing like Rembrandt or Picasso to think of yourself as an artist. So anyway, I decided to try and, be a school teacher. So I did that for a year, but I realized I felt as if I didn't know who I was anymore, because I couldn't make art as much as I'd like to. So I was working late into the night, working all night, going to bed at things like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, going to work. So I realized I had to leave that, and so I resigned my job, much to the horror of my family, as I had no income then. So I spent a few years doing various little jobs here and there, saving up money, trying to make artwork. And then I don't know whether I was getting anywhere at all. So I thought, oh, I'll pack it in, get another full-time job again. But then I thought, I know, I'll just try once more. And then by chance, I saw an advertisement for a competition, and the prize was a solo exhibition. And I very luckily entered and won it and had a solo exhibition. So that
It
led
was in
to,
where? Which organization and
oh,
what
this
was the
was in Greater Manchester, in Oldham Art Gallery,
oh,
which was fantastic. And they created a really nice poster for the exhibition, which, a hard copy poster, because that's what happened those days. So I sent it to lots of places. And then by another very lucky coincidence, an, an ex-tutor of mine happened to see it, because I'd sent it to the Slade School, because I'd met her by chance at a private view. So somebody was looking for people who to work part-time at Liverpool Polytechnic, as it was then. So she said, well, here's an artist here who's just had an exhibition. Perhaps you might like to approach her. So they did. And I got some part-time lecturing jobs. So I carried on having exhibitions, and I've been, teaching
yeah.
a little bit full-time for a few years, but part-time again. So that's how it got started.
Yeah, and this exhibition and award is one of the important points of your career line. And I know that your works are in some special collections in UK, and the museums like Tate Modern, Tate Liverpool are some of the museums that your works are takes place in. And would you like to talk about? I also wonder about the culture dimension. So I know that you are also part of Asian Triennial on Manchester, and the projects that you have done related with Asian culture and transcultural issues are also one of the important points of your work. So what would you like to talk about, say about the culture?
Yeah, I think starting off as essentially an immigrant, part of a migrant community when I first came here, it was quite a big culture shock at first. It was almost like living in colour and then suddenly living in black and white, or it seemed like it, because colour is, it's so lush, in
Mhm.
India. And just before we came here, we did, some trips, went to the Himalayas, to a city called Chandigarh where my relatives live, which was designed by Le Corbusier in the kind of Indian drive for post-independence kind of modernity. Went to Jaipur and sort of all those kind of places. So I really felt the change coming here. So, and then as a student at the Slade, the art education was predominantly from a Western canon, which was fine because it was so incredibly interesting and exciting. I was just felt like I was kind of like blotting paper, wanting to just drink it all in and absorb it all. So, but at the same time, I remember going to museums like the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum and noticing the work from other cultures, such as, Indian miniature paintings, Japanese woodblock traditional works by people like Hokusai, sculptures and so on. So I was very aware that there was a whole other side of my art education that I wasn't really addressing. So when I first started teaching in Liverpool, within about a year or two, I was very lucky that I had a fantastic head of department who wanted the curriculum to be enriched with greater awareness of the diversity that exists in our multicultural country and world, in fact. So he was very positive and enabled me to create quite a lot of projects. One of the projects was with a dancer called Bishaka Sarkar, who was trained in Indian South Asian dance, or in India. She's from Calcutta. So I did quite a lot of projects with her where everybody would dance, everybody would do some drawing, involving students and myself, with music and poetry, Western poetry, as well as poetry by Rabindranath Tagore. So that was really exciting. And then that led me to I applied for some funding to the Arts Council to do some research into Indian art, historical art, as well as contemporary art, with the result that I ended up giving 6 public lectures on Indian art. I think because I was very young, I didn't realize what a big I was being actually, I didn't feel brave at the time. I was just excited in learning about things and wanting to share things. Now I think I would probably stop several times thinking, oh, it's a big thing to do, because there was no internet. I just had to go to the library, borrow books, that kind of thing. Anyway, and because there was no internet, I just produced a kind of poster, a photocopy poster, to send it around to advertise these lectures. And by some strange coincidence, somebody who's become a very good friend now, Alno Mitha, saw this advert somewhere. So I just had a phone call one day saying, "Hello, I'm Alno Mitha. I've just finished doing a fellowship in an art college in Baroda." And he had studied under Anish Kapoor in Wolverhampton. So with that support, he just completed a year in Baroda. Anyway, he said, "I have quite a lot of catalogues and books, I'd bring them round to you." So, about an hour later, the doorbell rang and he arrived with all these amazing catalogues of contemporary Indian artists, people like Nilima Sheikh, who I'd never heard of before. And he'd studied under an artist called Nazri Mohammadi, who is now since passed away. So that was the start of my collaboration with Al Noor. And before I met him, I'd also set up a scheme with the Henry Moore Foundation for sculpture residencies to happen in the art school. They weren't for me, but they were for other artists. So artists could come and work in the art school, supported by the Henry Moore Foundation, but the artists could be from anywhere as long as their work was rooted in a non-Eurocentric perspective. So we had a series of those. Anyway, once I got to know Al Noor, We did quite a lot of projects together. One of them was a residency project where several artists from um, Bangladesh, from India, from Pakistan and Sri Lanka came and did residencies at the art college and also in other galleries in the Northwest. And one of them was Imran Qureshi, who was at the very start of his career. So now he's kind of world famous, and he's, you know, the most fantastic artist. He was really generous with his time. He gave demonstrations to students on how to do traditional miniature painting and so on. So that was a really good thing that I did with
Also
Al
an
Noor.
emerging artist in that.
Yeah,
You
and
have explored this artist, and now he's very famous. So he started with these exhibitions and the projects that you have done. So it's very important the role of the projects and the things that has done collectively, and interaction and the works for the future. Yeah, it's wonderful.
yeah, it was really interesting and fantastic. I mean, another project that Al Noor was doing at round about the same time. I think it was around about 2000 or something like that. I can't. My dates are a bit hazy. I'm sorry, but he staged a series of exhibitions at a time when India and Pakistan were nearly going to be at war with each other with nuclear weapons and so on. And yet, at the same time, all the artists from those countries were exhibiting together and meeting and having a party and getting on really well together. So, you know, art was this sort of wonderful bridge that brings people together
and cultures
you know,
together and interact. And also one of
yeah.
the interaction projects that we have done before taking you to the program, I've talked about that. Also our collaboration with UK and Turkey and the Living in Contrast project, and including and also now the catalog and your works are here. Maybe if the ones from Turkey who knows the Art Ankara and who have seen the works of her, Jai Chuhan's works are also in the catalog. So if you have the catalog, you can check and see them again. So I think, yes, the cross culture and the cultural value in art and interactions are very valuable. And the other question is related with universality and uniqueness. Between this tension or dilemma, or maybe the interaction of uniqueness and universality of art, the culture has an important role. And in your works also, we have said that the cultures, some points you use, or the background of the culture affects you. For example, isolation. I want to come to isolation figures and how you want to explain them. Women figures they are, and you're also talking about female and male tension between them, etc. Love and isolated rooms and the figures, but it is not just a figure. We feel the emotions of that figure. So it's also an abstract kind of figure. So would you like to say something and explain more in detail about your works?
Yes, yes, of course. Firstly, I would really like to thank you for staging the Living in Contrast exhibition
Oh,
for the Art Ankara Contemporary
it was
Art Fair.
wonderful.
I was really thrilled that you invited my contribution to that exhibition, and I'm really, really so very happy to be engaging with Turkey, you know, the art kind of world of Turkey to in some tiny little way, because it's, you know, geographically it's in the middle of the East
Yeah.
and the West, so it's a very important place. So I'm extremely thankful. Thank you so very much,
Oh,
Oscar.
it
It's
was
so delightful.
wonderful being together with you, and it was very valuable also for us and for the audiences. Yes, it was wonderful. Thank
Thank you.
you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
So you then asked about my actual
yeah.
paintings, the kind of the main themes. Um, so when I just to kind of go back in time a little bit, um, even when I was a student, I was always fascinated by the human body, the human form. So like many students, I did lots of experimental work, did some abstract work, some symbolist work, but towards the end, I focused a lot of work on paintings of figures moving in cities. And the thing that really interested me was their posture, their expressions. And in cities, often people are, I was looking at the outside, you know, traveling on trains and so on, where people are often in crowds, but nevertheless they have the individual has their sense of interiority, their own interior life. So this kind of focus on the human form has been there all along. And then for quite a few years after I finished being a student, I did a lot of work on about nature and landscape and gardens. But even there, when I was studying, looking at Indian art, doing my research for those lectures and so on, and trying to get a bit better educated, I looked at the way that Indian sculpture in particular depicts the human form and the kind of philosophy that underlies a lot of those depictions, and the idea of the dualities between life and death in the Indian philosophical kind of ways of thinking. The idea that there's a cyclical thing that goes on, you know, I mean, I don't personally necessarily believe in reincarnation or anything like that, and I'm not religious at all personally, but the philosophies are fascinating. The idea of, you know, people going through several life cycles of life and existence, and then death, and then back again. In a way, it's kind of quite scientific, because that's what actually happens to our bodies. The materiality disintegrates and becomes, you know, changes, and then it becomes part of the wider material existence and then reformulates itself. So, and the idea in Indian philosophy about the duality between the male and the female. For example, there's Shiva, who's one of the kind of figures in the kind of Hindu and also Buddhist pantheon. He's depicted in many different forms, like Shiva, the dancer. But in one of the forms, he's depicted as both male and female together. So I think it's always fascinated me about how we identify ourselves in terms of gender, and the kind of fluidities and the ambiguities, because the culture imposes so many ways of thinking and behaving because of the kind of wider politics. And yet I think both men and women maybe benefit from some of those wider things, but I think quite a lot of the time it causes a lot of conflicts. So I think the figures that I paint, I'm interested in depicting the body, and particularly the female body, probably because I can empathize and relate and identify with that myself. And I think my work really is trying to locate who I am in many different ways, where I'm from, what I was doing, what I'm doing now, what I might do in the future. So it's trying to make sense of things. And I think of the body, the physical body, in a state of movement. I'm fascinated by the moving body, the body as well as the posture, but what the postures reveal about movements. I mean, in dance, for example, Vishaka Saka, my friend, always talks about how dancers often achieve a certain pose and then they'll hold it for a few seconds, then move into another pose. And I'm fascinated by the movements between the one pose to the next.
Yeah,
So it's the physical movement of the body, maybe turning from one side to another, but also the kind of psychological movement within a figure.
they're not stable. They're
A
not
sense
stable
of,
and they're dynamic. In your paintings, the figures are not stable and they're dynamic, and the emotions are not just the forms, but emotions are shows that they are dynamic. So it's the kind of psychological parts, as you have underlined, that we can obviously see. Yeah, so another question is the isolation is a positive or a negative thing in that, in your opinion and in your view for your works? Because is it possible to be isolated totally from the environment, or is it a wish to be isolated sometimes, or is it something negative to be isolated? What do you think?
yeah, isolation, it can be lots of different things. Um, a lot of artists, I mean, sometimes I collaborate with other artists and stage events and so on, such as with dancers, or you collaborate with curators and staging exhibitions. But like many artists, I crave isolation, if that's a word. You crave time to be able to think in your own studio. So, and I think you can feel isolated and perhaps alienated, you know, even if you're in a crowd, or even if you're within a family or in your own country. It depends about the situation that you're in. I'm interested in the idea of feeling at home, or feeling sort of unhome. You know, the Sigmund Freud had the idea, the notion of the unheimlich, that sense of feeling kind of conflicted and feeling estranged, even within a home kind of environment. So you can feel unhome within your own body or within your own mind. You can feel self-alienated if you're not at peace, or if you're troubled by things. You can feel alienated from other people, even if you're in your own home, if you're not feeling okay. And conversely, you can feel at home with strangers if you're feeling okay with them. Or, and I think for me, the act of making paintings is a kind of sense of feeling at home, because it's where I connect with the materiality of color and paint and get completely absorbed in that. And I think the figures that I paint usually are on their own in a kind of pictorial space. The space is usually simplified, with simplified colours, usually often flat shapes, but sometimes the surface is broken up with different kinds of marks, and the figures are not usually fixed. They look like they're kind of in a state of flux, like they're kind of moving, and the spaces look kind of ambiguous, and the figures often look as though they're staged, a kind of in a like kind of dramatic, theatrical stage, so that the image itself becomes a kind of arena or a space, a kind of psychological space to explore various psychological feelings. And I try and make the figures look as though they have some sense of self-awareness, I hope, through the way I paint.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are wonderful. And also another thing about isolation is, today in these corona days, corona times, artists, yes, we are producing by isolation, sometimes creating, being alone and close to ourselves is of course creates new things, etc. And of course we are not possible to totally be closed because of our global environment. So what do you think, and how these isolation processes, these quarantine days affected you and your art? Do you think that is there a big change in something about your life, in your life, or the way of your painting or thinking? What's the effect of this process? The normality has changed or not for you?
Yeah, well, I know that there's some really terrible things that are happening because of the coronavirus, and
Yeah.
lots of people being sick and dying and so on. So I feel hugely, hugely lucky because I'm okay. And, you know, the people in my immediate circle, they're all well. So that's very thankful for that. So as I said, for me, it, I mean, most of the time I crave
Yeah.
more and more time to be alone in the studio, and so I've had more time to do that, so it's okay. um, and in terms of work, it's been really good because I think I've because I've had the extra time, I've ended up experimenting with things like making monoprints and so on, or using paint in a way where I have less control of what I'm doing than previously, you know. Um, so it's been quite valuable actually for me. It's
You
been
have changed. Is there any change in your figures? Are they realized these unusual times, your figures? Or
um, I think I think I think I'm letting them become more looser
uh,
because I've been experimenting and messing around with monoprints, which where you don't have a lot of control. You don't know what the image is going to be like when you lift the paper from whatever you've been doing. So it's encouraged me to make more of a mess.
yeah,
It's not, the mess is the wrong word when I've been painting on my
yes.
canvases, and allow that to happen. I think
The
what
excellent.
I find really exciting about painting, or and I think it must be the case with whatever kind of artwork,
Yeah.
you know, material that you use, is that kind of tension between having control and not being in control.
Yes.
And you can have all kinds of ideas that you want to do, but it's only when you start to try and do them, you end with the materials that you're using, you end up with something that you had no idea that you would end up with, a particular image. So I think that's what's making me more and more kind of aware of those things, and exploring the idea of time as well, because this in these days of coronavirus, I've always been very aware of time. You can't really, I don't feel isolated because I think I'm in the world of art, you
Yeah.
know, where I'm doing the same thing,
With your
not exactly the
medium?
same, but similar things as artists have done for centuries, which is making images, working from observation and your imagination, from memory, a kind of combination of all those things, so that you feel that you're not alone
Yeah.
ever, really, because you're part of this sort of huge history of people being creative since time began. So you're part of that huge stream of consciousness. So there's this element of time, and when you make paintings, some of my paintings take about, I might be working on the same painting for about 6 years, not every day, obviously. You have to leave them to rest, so then come back to them, and then sometimes you don't quite know what to do, you have plans, you almost have to do something completely at random, almost create an accident
Yeah.
on them, which you can then grapple with. So I'm becoming more aware of those tensions between completely, the seemingly accidental, and how you kind of work with that.
Yeah, so in that term, maybe we can say that these paintings and the artworks are also living things, isn't it? Living bodies. So sometimes the accident, spontaneous things that is related with the time and place, and also our plans and all the conscious story of the history and arts comes together and matches. And this is the, I think, the magic and the mystery of the artwork. So I told always that they are living forms of bodies. Sometimes they represent themselves more than we planned, isn't it? And we can also see these types of things in your style and paintings.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of aesthetic, lineages in my work. Um, I I'm influenced by a lot of different artists. I mean, I love going to exhibitions, and that's one thing I've really missed in these days.
Yeah,
That is, you can't go and see the actual works, and I'm fascinated by how, at the click of a button, you can see so much art in on a screen, which
yeah,
is so different because it's backlit,
yeah. What do you think
on a
about it?
screen and in books. But I can see the influences in my work from artists such as the expressionist artists, German expressionist artists, artists such as Frank Auerbach, who's still alive, all kinds of artists, and also Indian art as well. People often try and, you know, place me and many other diaspora artists um, into some kind of slot, and there is a kind of politics of inclusion and exclusion that goes on, which can ghettoize and marginalize. But personally, I absolutely embrace all the complexities
Yeah,
because I think they enrich,
yeah,
our art practice, and the kind of juxtaposition of all these influences come together and create something new.
yeah,
Not, you know,
yeah.
not new in the sense that there's nothing new in the world in some ways, but something unexpected in any case and fresh. So, so I don't know how I've ended up talking about all that. The So I've
Yeah,
forgotten now.
maybe.
What did you ask?
Yeah, maybe also you can show some of the works if you would like to from your studio after this talk. Maybe it could be nice. Then we can go on with our time right now. And I have also some more questions related with these days. But when we are in the isolated figures and your works, maybe we can see some of them. Is it possible?
Yeah, I'll try and just hold my phone and just sort of turn it round in my studio.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's not a very big studio. This is a painting that's kind of on the go, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Maybe you want.
I'll just turn it round the phone,
Yeah.
and then that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's another painting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that does that give you a
Yeah.
little sort of idea, sense of the place.
Yeah. Really, it's nice to see your studio and your works together with this talk. It's wonderful. Yeah, it gives an idea. It's matched together. I
Yeah,
think it's nice
yeah,
for also audiences.
yeah.
So when we come to our times again. Yes, as you have said, physically seeing a painting is totally different. Paintings are living things, living forms, so we should feel them nearly. It's something like not meeting in a physical atmosphere, but just talking like that. Yeah, it's of course very important, but feeling the real painting is of course something different. So what do you think about this online? It's nowadays we are needs to share our artworks and lots of things in digital platforms. And what do you think about this new? It's not a new trend, but today everything is a part of that digital world. So, what do you think? What's your idea about being in a real gallery and in an online gallery and the exhibitions that you have attended? Is there any other than ours that you have attended in that process? Anything that has happened in your side?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's wonderful that people, like you've organized the online exhibitions with TamSanat,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of activity, and it's really exciting that people are coming together. For example, I'm doing a project at the moment. Just last week, I ended up having a Zoom conversation with an artist in Panama, another artist who was in Kuala Lumpur, and I was in Manchester, and my colleague here, who's organising the project, was also in Manchester. And I never met the artist before, and within about 2 minutes we were going, well, and how are we going to do this? And what do you think of this idea? And it was just like going into a meeting, around the table in a cafe or something. So it's really exciting and so on. But there is a massive difference between looking at actual artwork and reproductions, which is why people queue up around the buildings, to see the major exhibitions. You can't, and you go there and they're jam-packed. The last exhibition that I saw, I think it was the week before the lockdown actually happened, or maybe 2 weeks before that, was the Picasso and Paper exhibition at the Royal Academy. And I went there with a friend, and it was just absolutely incredible to see the real work that Picasso did, and every time I see a Picasso exhibition, I just want to do loads and loads of work, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So as soon as that very night, even though I was really tired, I was staying up in bed doing all these drawings on bits of paper, because you just think you've got to work all the time. So that was the last exhibition that I saw in real life. But and the reason I think it's so exciting to see the actual works is because sometimes, even if you've seen the same paintings or sculpture or whatever before, you can see new things in it over the years, because you yourself are changing and your understanding of the work, the same work, is changing. And the work itself might, if it's well conserved, doesn't change that much, Say a painting in the National Gallery, the same painting, some of them have been there for decades, but you see different things in them, and then you see them in different light. So there's a lot of time, and in each of the images, there's so much time in the painting. The artist has spent time making the paintings. So, and yet that time is encapsulated in the one static layer at the end, which is amazing. So, so the other exhibition that I had some work in, actually, a live exhibition. It was at Home, which is an art centre in Manchester, and it was for the Manchester Open. It was an open art exhibition called Everyone is an Artist, something like that. Anyway, so that exhibition hadn't finished, but they suddenly had to close the gallery doors. But I was really pleased to be in that exhibition. I had the one painting in there called Shadows and the Sea, and they had 5 prizes for the exhibition. I was very fortunate to get one of them, which was wonderful. you know, the different prizes in different categories. So that was nice. And that actual painting, I think I have it on my Instagram page somewhere, was one of, I think all art is political. I think my art is political. I think the painting the human body is political. I think it's political to be making art, full
Yes.
stop,
Yes.
really. To be creative and to collaborate creatively is political.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm very, very interested in politics and so on, I don't often make work very directly based on some political events. But that particular painting, I'd been looking at lots of news footage of the migrant people on the boats crossing the seas,
Yeah.
of men and so on. So I was really struck. So I think that has come into that painting where figures can be seen and some of them can't be seen. They're ambiguous. And I also had been looking at some sculpture by Rodin. There'd been an exhibition by Rodin in the British Museum. So somehow all those things kind of came together. Then I thought of the title Shadows and the Sea. These people are like shadows in our background of our lives.
Yeah.
I say us because
Yeah. Yeah.
it depends on your point of view. From their point of view,
Yeah.
we are
We are
they.
all
You know?
integrated to each other. So everyone is responsible to anything that's happened, isn't it? So we are all together, and everything creates us, and also we are a part of that creation. So yes, we cannot be a part of it, and yeah, the shadows and the sea is an interesting perception to that. Yeah, it's wonderful. Also, the other thing is your book. I know that you have planned a book. Because of that, also maybe how, the time, is it certain, or what's your plan about for your book that is related with your biography and artworks? Would you like to say anything?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yes, the book started off as a catalogue for 2 exhibitions. Sorry, I haven't mentioned, we didn't get to talk about the Asia Triennial Manchester when I was talking about my friend Alno Mitha. Alno Mitha established something called the Asia Triennial Manchester, and he's the director, the founding director of the Asia Triennial Manchester, and it's been going since 2008, I think. I may have my dates wrong. Anyway, in 2011, he commissioned me to produce an exhibition, a solo exhibition at the People's History Museum, responding to the South Asian community in North Manchester. So I did that very directly, working from that community. And before that, he'd commissioned me to do stage a solo exhibition which toured the country, toured to 6 venues, including the Waterman's Art Centre in London. And that was called Parampara Portraits. And that was a series of portraits of people from the South Asian community who have achieved, who are like role models. So I painted, I've got a catalogue of it here. I painted Baroness Pola Udin, who was a politician in the Houses of Parliament. I painted a trade unionist, Deepak Chauhan, no relation, who's now since passed away. And that painting is in the collection of the TamSanat museums. Anyway, so Alno and I've worked closely, and in 2011, so Alno invited me to stage this solo exhibition, and then again in 2018, I was involved in the Asia Triennial Manchester, and the Asia Triennial Manchester is the only arts festival in Europe on the theme of Asia. And you might say, why Manchester? And what's really, Asia is embedded in Europe, in the UK.
Yes.
Like many other places, Africa is embedded in here, if you think of the history.
Yeah.
And there's always been a symbiotic relationship between, say, India, you know, saying India, I'm thinking of it in colonial times before it got split up into Pakistan and so on. It's always been a historically a symbiotic relationship between India and the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So that's continued in contemporary times with the exoticization of a lot of Asian culture within, you know, like the popularity of yoga and Indian food and so on. But the reality is very different. And what I think is really good about Asia Triennial Manchester, it's on the theme of Asia, but it's not exclusive of artists. It's very inclusive. So you could be an artist who has no background or roots in Asia, but whose work deals with those ideas, so that you would end up maybe contributing to this festival.
Art origin is not important, but the artwork's origin is important in that side.
Yeah, but at the same time, a lot of artists have come from Asia through the festival. So it's been really fantastic meeting some of these artists like Subodh Gupta, who I've met. Anyway, in 2018, I should speed up a little bit. In 2018, I was involved in the Asia Triennial Manchester, and I staged a solo exhibition in Gallery Oldham again, and then also at home, which is a big art centre in the centre of Manchester. And they were both solo exhibitions. In Gallery Oldham, it was a traditional display of about 12 large paintings, whereas at home, it was a very experimental exhibition where I showed some completed works within an installation of objects such as a skeleton, plants, electrical equipment, and also objects with resonances of Asian culture, South Asian culture. So I had lots of saris hanging to create a kind of environment. They were hanging from a kind of gazebo. And within that space, there was music playing all the time, and also started 8 really large paintings, the size of the paintings that you've seen in my studio. I started them there, so I became a painter, but also part of a performance. And I also invited dancers to come in and dance at some of the time, and also life models to pose, but not for a class. They were just posing some of the time. And people, the audience, could come and respond through making paintings as well in a space in the gallery. So because I started 8 really large paintings, I thought instead of producing a catalogue for the show, people can see the show anyway, I would turn it into a longer term book with a longer time span, showing the paintings when they're completed, and they are now completed, as well as other paintings. So at the moment, because of the coronavirus, I'm not able to have a photographer come and take photographs of the work, so it's delayed. But apart from that, all the texts are completed. So I'm very lucky that I've had a text written by an art historian called Rina Arya, who has really talked about the interiority of the body that I paint. And also another text by a writer called Graham Gillock, who's a sociologist. And he's written about a sense of time in my work, and how there's a sense of movement from one stage of a pose into another. And he's also talked about transience, you know, citing people like Walter Benjamin, for whom the idea of the transience and the temporary nature was a defining feature of modernity. And then Andrew Stahl, who's a painter, friend of mine,
now
fantastic
he's
painter.
Together with us,
Yeah, he is. Yes, he's together in the World Art exhibition, the TamSanat one. So he's very kindly given me some wonderful questions, which has really helped me to focus my thoughts about colour, about my use of space, about the influences in my work, about the relationship between painting and the performative. And then another interview was from Alnor Mitha, who's
Yeah,
asked me some
he's
wonderful
also one of the
questions to
artists
do with
in
my,
our exhibition.
yes,
Yeah,
in the Art Ankara exhibition. So
yeah,
he asked more biographical questions as well as about the work. And then a curator who's also a really wonderful person,
yeah,
Adam Carr,
yeah,
because he knew other people and I myself was writing about the actual work.
yeah,
He's focused on talking about the exhibition at home, the experimental nature of that space where nothing was fixed.
yeah.
So
It's
so
wonderful. Yeah, we are looking forward to see the book. Yeah, I've just seen a draft version of it for my research about
yes,
UN art industry that I'm working on Liverpool, and
yeah.
it was wonderful, really. And now we have just 5 more minutes to close the program. We have talked 1 hour, nearly 1 hour, and it was wonderful to hear all culture-related items in your works and your own perspectives and art style in isolated figures. And I want to repeat that they can see, the audiences can see your artworks in our exhibitions on TamSanat.net. And many thanks to you and for all audiences that are together with us. I would like to hear your last words. What would you like to say in briefly in 3 minutes we have?
Okay, well, first, very quickly, the title of my book is called Refuge,
Yeah,
and it's distributed by Corner House Publications, which are based at home. The last thing I'd like to say is I think art is a wonderful way of discovering about yourself, about the world, and about building bridges, you know, with other people and with times past
yeah,
and looking to the future. And I think sometimes it it's important
yeah,
just to be. You don't always have to be hugely political. You can be. It's wonderful
yeah, yeah.
if that's what drives you and you can make, you know, very overt political statements, that's fine. But I think just to bring us back to what makes us human, and art is part of what makes us human.
Yes.
So that was the idea of my show at home in Manchester, was to allow people to feel connected with themselves, not so alienated, so they feel at home with themselves and with other people.
Oh,
So
it's wonderful. Yeah, I hope to see you after these courses and in art school cafes and art school atmosphere in John Moores. It was lovely to meet you in here. Many thanks to you and hope to see you again. Maybe I thought that we can talk about the Manchester Triennial with Alnor Mita in here in detail more. So thank you very much to everyone who are together with us today, and thank you to you again.
and I would really like to thank you, Oscar, very, very much indeed. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah.
I really love having our lunches and our coffees and so on together. And I'd like to thank whoever has been listening so much for their time. I'm really very honoured that people are sparing time to listen to whatever I had to say, and wish everyone the very best and best of luck and good health.
Oh, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you. The records can be again. You can listen to the records again in our YouTube channel and TV channels. So you can follow them for the audiences or the ones who couldn't watch right now. I would just like to repeat, and many thanks again, and hope to see you in another program with another artist. So thank you very much for everyone for listening, and thank you, Jai. Hope to see you again as soon as possible.
Okay, thanks very much, Oscar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, bye,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.